Late Friday night, America lost the last president of the greatest generation. George H.W. Bush, America's 41st president. His final words, "I love you too," for America's 43rd president, his son, George W. His lifetime of service capped by a single term as president, that loss which hit so hard in the moment, redeemed by grace in defeat and wisdom revealed by history. The 20-year-old fighter pilot shot down in World War II executed a soft landing to the Cold War as president, a singular achievement of a remarkable man. America will remember and celebrate President Bush all this week with the civic rituals he revered at the Capitol, the National Cathedral, then a last journey home to Texas. And we begin this morning with his closest friend, the tennis partner who went on to manage all of George Bush's campaigns, became his White House Chief of Staff and Secretary of State. James Baker, welcome to This Week. Mr. Secretary, I know you had the privilege of sharing those final days and hours with President Bush. What can you share about that?
Well, the president had a very gentle and peaceful passing, but he surprised us. He kept surprising us throughout his illness because he would get sick. They'd put him in the hospital. He'd bounce back. That happened for five or 6 years, I think. He had a form of Parkinsonism that prevented him from getting rid of a lot of fluids, and they would build up and they'd impact his lungs adversely. So he went through a lot of that. But he really wanted to live long enough to get back to his summer home in Kennebunkport this last summer, which he did. And then he wanted to live long enough to get back to his home here in Houston, which he did. But he began to go downhill a little bit and rather rapidly after that. He hadn't eaten for 3 or 4 days last Friday, by last Friday, and I lived fairly close to him, and I go over there a fair amount. So I went over Friday morning at 7:15. He hadn't eaten for 3 days, and one of his aides said, "Mr. President, Secretary Baker's here." Well, he perked up. He opened his eyes. He looked at me. He said, "Hey, Bake," he said, "where are we going?" So he kept his spirit and he kept his sense of humor right till the very end. But his passing, George, was very gentle and very peaceful. And he had members of his family there, and Susan and I were there, and others, Gene Becker, his chief of staff, and the doctor.
That is a blessing. And I guess you also had the blessing of friendship with him for so long. Have you ever imagined how different both your lives would have been had you not met?
Well, I've certainly imagined how different my life would have been had he not been my friend. I never intended to get into politics and public service, George. I was a lawyer in Houston, Texas. I was content to continue that. Then I lost my wife to cancer at the age of 38, and Barbara and George were the last people to come see her other than family before she died. And George came to me and said, "You know, you need to take your mind off your grief. How about helping me run for the Senate here in Texas?" I said, "Well, George, that's a great idea, except for 2 things. Number 1, I don't know anything about politics. I was sort of apolitical. And number 2, I'm a Democrat." He said, "Well," he said, we can cure that latter problem," and we did. I changed parties and helped him in that Senate race. And from there on out, it was an extraordinarily warm and close friendship. And as you said, I think in your introduction, I did lead all of his campaigns for president. We became extraordinarily close, and then he gave me the privilege of serving as Secretary of State of this wonderful country of ours at a time of fundamental change. His presidency, from a foreign policy standpoint, George, was such a consequential presidency. I mean, I could go back and check off all the things that happened, but it was a time of fundamental and radical change.
And there's no question
world.
He will be remembered, and you will be remembered for how you managed that situation. I know that in a conversation with John Meacham, the president said that, very matter-of-factly, that he's just going to be an asterisk in history.
No, I don't agree with that. Yes, he's a one-term president, but thanks to you guys involuntarily retiring us from public service. But he is going to be and was a very consequential one-term president, and I would argue far and away the best one-term president we've ever had, and such a good one that he was, in my view, one of the very best presidents of all time. And he really got a lot done, and he did it with great skill, and he knew foreign policy. He understood it. He managed the end of the Cold War peacefully. It ended with a whimper, not a bang, and then he did all those other things.
Historians are coming around to that view. Which single memory of President Bush will you cherish the most?
I suppose one of the most vivid memories I have is sitting in his suite at the 1980 Republican convention when it looked like Governor Reagan, who was going to get the nomination, was going to pick Jerry Ford, my old boss. I had been Ford's chairman in the campaign against Carter in '76. Looked like he was going to come back maybe as vice president for Governor Reagan, for President Reagan. And we were sitting there, but we were the only opponent of Governor Reagan in that primary that had any delegates, and we had a fairly substantial number of delegates. And the phone rang, and a voice said, "Is Ambassador Bush there for Governor Reagan?" And I answered the phone, and that was the moment that I think that had that not happened, I really am convinced there would never have been a Bush 41 presidency, and if that hadn't happened, there probably would never have been a Bush 43 president.
Change the course of history. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, George.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.